All right, so full screen. Can you all see it?
Yep.
All right, so what you'll need for this is basically just Blender and patience. But the essentials of retopology is to have a good sculpt to work on, first of all. Oh, I got to upload a model. Sorry, I noticed you're getting something.
Oh yeah, just smack that in VC.
Yeah. No. Okay, sorry. Anyway, I'm going to be uploading the imp that I'm using for this demo. So while I'm talking, you can go ahead and download it. And that'll be perfect. I'm not sure where I put it. All right, sorry. If not, you can probably already have a sculpt ready. Here it is. Okay. Sure. So I'm going to put this into the session content. Where did I put this actually?
In
put
VC
it on
chat.
VC chat. Okay. There it is. Sweet. That's not where that goes. Okay. Sorry for the wait. Okay. So this will be the high poly asset sculpt of this imp that I'm showing off here on the screen. What's cool about him is that he's got a lot of tricky details like spikes that are asymmetrical. He's got pointy ears and jagged fins all over him. So he's a pretty challenging thing to sculpt, but he's also pretty blocky, and he's got a lot of clear detail and stylized shapes that make it easy to see where his forms are and what should kind of be getting attention for your topology. So that's what we're working with. Okay, so the tools that you're going to need for retopologizing are going to be these settings. So when you get the model, what you'll do is you'll add you'll do Shift-C to center your frame and camera, or center your cursor on the origin where the character should be. And then you'll make a new object and you'll activate these settings. So you'll find the magnet at the top of your screen, set it to faces for the drop-down menu there, like that. And then you'll also want to turn on the auto merge setting. It lets you move things around and sort of snap them into place. So that if they get two vertices too close together, they'll merge automatically for you. And then other really important thing to have are these two modifiers. They're key to working with special characters for retopologizing things. And shrink wrap is the real MVP of the stack. It's going to let you, with these settings, you're going to want to set it to above surface, target the mesh you want to be working with, and then give it a little bit of offset so you can see the vertices poking out of your mesh or just above the surface. And then I'll head over to the materials tab, or if I'm moving too fast, you can pop on voice, let me know. But give it a viewport display color, as well as also soften the alpha down to about 50. That way you'll be able to see the high poly object beneath your working retopo or retopo mesh. And that's another nice secret quality of life trick that I use. We're still in a bit of a lecture. This is the last one. But what I'm going to show you here are basically the keys of how to divide up your shapes. You're going to want to divide things into a top, bottom, rear, and front. So specifically anything like a tube, an arm, leg, a finger, a neck. And then you'll want to cap it off, making sure you're working with about 8 on each side. You can then subdivide it from there to give more detail. But this is the core of getting a good shape that represents all the detail you need. You can also then, as you start building up more detail, you can pull a middle face down and make it into a quad with an F to cap 3 faces into one. That's a trick I use all the time. And then I'll handle stuff like teeth and spikes by going over the ridge with a loop, initially 2, and then I'll make a bit of a circle around it, cap it off with a pair on top, and then make another sort of trick. And it's basically like a stretched out version of a cone, but with the middle part being coming to a point. And that makes it a nice trick to remember. And now the reason why I don't work with triangles is because they'll split into quads anyway when I subdivide. And I work in low detail, and then I subdivide up using another modifier to add on sort of a more balanced, even topology flow. It will increase your poly count by, I think it's like a factor of 4, because it splits everything all into 4 faces, or by itself 3 when you're working with a triangle, and so on. It makes like a fan of quads. The more faces you have around an irregular shape, it's not a quad. But I think that's pretty cool. I'll show that off as well when I'm doing my demo. Okay, so now I'm going to begin. I'm going to concentrate on how a hand works, because it's the key way of demonstrating how the front, top, and tip work. And that's going to be a nice place to go from there. So what I'll do is I'll open up my Blender, and I'm going to change my stream to be my Blender tab, and that's where we'll continue this. And so far we've actually covered a lot of ground. Do you have any questions before I move on to this part? Everyone loves to be on mute. It's always so embarrassing.
No, I don't think anyone has questions. You're good, Jack.
Okay, fantastic. All right, because I'm always the guy who's like, hey, yeah, I have something to say. How was your Tuesday? That's Wednesday. Oh. Okay, so I couldn't help myself, and I started doing straight into getting myself warmed up. So I have on this side already a hand, and on the other side, because it's mirrored, it's popping up there. But I'll demonstrate right now where all the settings are that you're going to find, the ones I highlighted earlier. So you have your mirror or your snap to faces just right up here. You get a drop down section of either increment, vertex, edge, face, volume. I do faces when I'm doing retopology. Makes things much easier because it just means you have to just take that and then click, 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 click. I'm using Poly Builder there, so it's different. But if you set the cursor, then you can just work along one at a time. It's very easy to go from there. But where was I? Okay, so I'll show you the Poly Builder after I show you a couple other quality of life things. Here's the auto merge, and you'll find the options for that over here. The auto merge, it's good to not have this be cranked up too high, but it's good to have this be between 3 or so. It makes things easy. And how that works is I'll demonstrate it here on this guy's forearm. But what we do is we're going to make a fresh edge here, expand that out. I'm going to I put the wrong thing. I'm not going over the basics of like the how to select stuff. You probably already know that stuff. But here we are. I grab these, I extrude them. I'm going to flip these. So I open up my search menu, and I flip them so I can tell what's going on. We can see that they're already being subdivided because I have my stack here. I'll turn off visibility of that right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'll crank over to Poly Builder. It's this icon here. And then I'm going to show you how it works here. So by default, it's going to highlight any edge and let you extrude geometry out of that. And it works really well, especially when you're using auto merge, because it'll let you work like that. But when you bring things close together, they will pop just like that, and you'll be able to keep going from there with things getting clean. And you can move things around by putting your mouse over top of individual points and clicking on them, or right-clicking, depending on how you have your selection set up. And if you shift and hold shift and click, you can delete them. And that works really nice and smoothly too. Another function I like, this is all just like working with quads, but if you hold control over top of an edge, it'll let you work with point by point. And any triangle that it encounters that's half done, it'll automatically fill into making a completed quad. But it's difficult to tell, or it's difficult if you want to have two bring themselves together. So if they're too close together, it'll end up popping between them. So a handy feature is if you are holding control and sitting at a cursor or at one of these vertices, it's going to highlight both edges, and then when you click, it'll drag out another face that's right, another quad perfectly from those two, and that is a really great feature, and ends up turning the process into just like a nice calming sort of knitting time. But if we click on this button here, we can see through our meshes and we'll see all of our points clearly. But if we're working with something that's going to double over and stack top of itself, so like let's say if I filled up the other side and it got really dense, what you're going to have happen is that you're going to end up clicking through the arm and dragging stuff that you don't want, like from the other side of the forearm. And you're going to be really careful about that. So what I do to minimize that for myself is I go to shrink wrap here in this setting, and I just pop out of the offset so that it makes the mesh points stand out much more, and that makes everything much more visible for me to work with. And if you can tell where things are overlapping, you want to try to minimize points where the high poly mesh is sticking through, because everywhere that is sticking through is where we're going to end up losing volume. But when you work with really fine, tight detail, and you're trying to get perfectly into a crack between a crevice, like let's say right down there in the forearm, you're going to lose detail. So you just kind of have to expect that and be ready for it. So that's how the core features of the Poly Builder work. I'm going to shift, and get rid of all these. And then I'm going to show you the principles that I was using in my demo earlier with my slideshow. So I've already done two fingers. I'm not going to bother deleting those. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can separate the finger into its top, its bottom, its outside, and its inside. And so we're going to make sure we have nothing selected. And we're just going to switch to cursor. We're going to make a loop. So we'll go 1, 2, then select that. Just pop a quad there. And I'll just start fresh without any connected geometry. And I link them up together. But we're going to work on making it just be 4 faces initially, because this is much easier to control. I think I used E there when I shouldn't have. Anyway, so select an edge, bring it down like that, so you have yourself the inside, and then go to the bottom there, and then close up the loop using F to make your last quad. Now you'll have your top, inside, outside, bottom, and you'll be able to extrude that down. Here's a cool function. I'm just going to show this off, a little bit of style. But if you bring down an edge loop, right, and then you select all of it, and then Shift Alt to select another loop. You can dial in, search for bridge edge loops, and you'll automatically get them all connected up like that. But we're going to try to keep as much detail as we can. And now I'll show you how to cap off the fingertip. What I do here is, and this character, it's very exaggerated to be blocky, to be more cartoonish and stylized. But I pull out the bottom face, and what I try to do is I try to leave room for making the nail. So then once I get the top face, I'll bring down the top face here, and I'll make a new ring, and the new ring is going to go around the nail, and we're almost at the part where we're going to start to subdivide out our shape, because we're working with specifically the top and bottoms, but we're going to start noticing that we're losing a lot of detail, or we're starting to like cut things into themselves. So when I get this here and I complete this, I'm going to want to use Control R to subdivide these, and then smooth out our detail. Notice that we're also breaking down the nail itself into being top, bottom, and sides format. And we want to make sure that our tops and our bottoms have the same amount of geometry, and that our inside and outsides are also going to have the same amount of geometry. That way they can meet in the middle very cleanly, and that is going to make our overall geometry much more organized and easy to work with, and just more aesthetic. I like that. It makes things look more planned out and organized. So we're going to move this to kind of get the point out. Bring up the nail. And then we're going to start going around this loop. Look at how we did this earlier here. So we bring around. Matching up all of our detail. And then we get this. So now that'll complete. All I gotta do is smash F, and it'll fill in our loop quite perfectly there. And then I'm going to, since I know that I've used my method of top, bottom, inside, outside, if I make this loop, I'm going to be able to use the command grid fill. Let me know if you can't find this. It might be in an add-on feature. It's one that comes standard with Blender. It's probably like Loop Tools or some option like that. I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but if it sees a mess like this, all you're going to want to do is fiddle with offset for a bit, and then we're going to turn this on, maybe buff our span up, so we end up having geometry like that. But you see it's going to be poking around. That's just because our shrink wrap is looking for the nearest face, and when we're working something like that, it's going to be much more spread out, possibly to the point of being uncertain where to stick stuff. But from here, to build up our detail, notice that we have a circumferential loop that goes from the back to the point. Very clean, helps us divide things up. We also have a longitudinal loop around the claw itself, and that makes it easy to add more detail as much as we need from there. We're also then going to cut these through, pop in another face here, and on the inside too. As we go, our process is going to get more and more intuitive, and you'll kind of know once you get the principles all together how to take things for the future. The only hiccup in this process is on stuff like ears, where the inside and the outside have a pretty distinct difference in terms of detail. like the inside of an ear is way more detailed than the outside of an ear. And what I do in that case is I implement a lot of those catches. That's what those shapes, like I'm going to make one right here. So I've pulled out here. We have 3 faces. Boop. Drag this down like that. Pop there. Click F. You made yourself a catch. It brings 3 down to being 1 and helps to clean up an overflow of detail, but they're a little tricky to plan. But if you have an odd number of faces at any point accidentally, you can use a catch to kind of pare it down a bit. Although 1 is still an odd number, so I might end up resorting to using a triangle if I have no choice. I'm going to pop away these with my quad builder, and then I'm going to finish off the nail by adding a loop down here. I use G when I'm working with quad builder because otherwise I'll end up making stuff accidentally. I just tap G to move things more specifically. I don't want to make stuff that I don't really plan on making. But we get a shape like this. Pop one here, and then smooth these out. I'm going to turn off this. See how this becomes a much more of a messy space to work with? That's why we use the features of offset to get that working. I think the one thing I also forgot to show you was the spot in the material setting where I get my mesh to be see-through, so I can have it be workable and visible with the high poly model below it. And that is in my material setting down there. Just go down right to the bottom and you'll see viewport display right where I talked about it. And I can make my topology any color I want. And I can also set its visibility so that I'm able to see either just my mesh in a slight tint where things have been. I go with red because it's much more visible, but you can go with any color that strikes your fancy and helps you work better. We can see that there is, because of our offset, quite a gap between our mesh that's originally there and the retopology. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with reducing that number to get it to be something that's more accurate and true to the original mesh. So we'll go back to our modifiers, and you'll play around with this all the time as you're working. At 0, you can barely see the mesh at all, but you also see there's not very many instances where it's poking through, which is good. But as you expand it out, you can have some trouble. Just be a little cautious of that, and you'll be all right. So I'm going to put a loop here, around there, and I haven't yet closed my finger, so I'm going to move around there, and I'm going to place this here on the outside, and then mirror that on the inside there, and start working out to place our stuff all together. So let's say I want to make this more visible. Yeah, just the bottom of the finger. I'm going to put another loop down the middle of this part here. I right click it just to deactivate it. I think that sometimes it's left click for other people, but it's like a cancel setting. All right, so this is a little tricky, like this sort of space. But what I do is I'm going to basically just handle it one at a time and try to make sure that I'm doing it the same way on either side. So I'm just going to expand one at a time. And we're going to want to make a 5-sided face. So let's put a edge there. And then bring another one forward. Try to keep track of this. And then now, what we can do is, I think what I was doing the other ones was I was making a star by merging the loop that goes around the nail with the one there. And all I'll do is move them together. This one together. I want to try to do them all the same just because it would make it more artistic and kind of make a better look. But with characters that have like distinctively different features, that's not quite workable all the time. Now what I do is I'm going to just pop and fill this, and that's our last finger taken care of. Stuff like hands are always tricky, and because characters can have so many different shapes for hands, it can be easy to lose track or have to feel like you're reinventing the wheel every time you do it. And that's not necessarily the best feeling to have as an artist. But there's a few patterns that are, for me, reliable and trustworthy. So I'm going to try to show you those at least a little bit, but don't rely on them too much. All right. I can't tell if I'm being talked to. Are people messaging in the chat there?
Yeah. One person is.
Okay, what are they saying?
Something. Let me see. He said so. Is retopology not supposed to be visible outside the original scope? Question mark.
It should be able to match it as close as reasonably possible. Is what should be happening. So what ends up going on is that you end up having a reasonable balance where you try to make it be like a mix of either as close as you can get it or slightly above. But if you have it too distant, then when you bake, you end up missing things. So your array in the bake doesn't go far enough into the mesh from the topology, and you'll end up having like upside down gross patches. So it's best for the retopology to be as close as reasonably possible to minimize any glitches and issues. And that's how I've always done it, because I've had some awful bakes. Yep, go on.
Recommend like having us lit. So you kind of how much offset would you recommend if we're using the shrink wrap?
So the offset is only really a visual help that I use while I'm working. When I'm ready to finish off, what I do is I reduce the offset all the way down to 0. And that's what you'll do when you're all done with working on it. That's a good question. Thanks for reminding me to talk about that. So that helps it become as close as you can possibly get. And then you can, if you're having stuff where, like let's say, like this probably has too much stuff popping out of it, but when I reactivate my mesh, there's like a about a 50-50 mix of like things being under, things being over, and that's about tolerable because it seems like a fair balance.
What you could do as well, if you don't like working with offset, is you can use hidden wireframe while working on your object, which is what I end up doing.
Right. Would the concern with using offset be forgetting to undo it? Is that like what you're bothered by, or like what you're kind of worried about? Because
I mean, it's not what I'm worried about. It's just a preference thingy. It's like I don't like working with offset just because sometimes it can somewhat misrepresent where you should be putting vertices.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Used to it.
So would you like to remind me where the hidden wireframe setting is?
You see that little square tab above your wrench? I forget what it's called. Hold up.
Right
Your object properties.
here. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So then what you do is you display it as a
So
wire.
basically, yeah. There you go. And then
Mhm.
you have it in front, so it displays on top of your object all the time.
Yeah. Now see, the in front would trip me up, so I prefer not using it because I end up selecting stuff that's on the back of my object, and I prefer being able to count on knowing where stuff is going to actually be.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I use my offset and prefer that method.
I use both.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like what gets you the best results the fastest is what we always go for as game artists.
Yeah, it's all just preference stuff, honestly.
All right. So note how I've now made a loop that goes around all the fingers. But what's happening is that I'm going to end up having too much geometry if I try to just carry this all the way up the arm. I'm going to go and divide the arm up into the traditional top, bottom, left, and right. We're just going to try to find a place to put that. Note that the arm of this guy is pretty characteristically muscled. So it's going to be a little tricky to work with, but we're going to pull a face out, and I'll use a mix of extruding and generating new faces whole cloth. He has also this bump in his knuckle, or like in his wrist, that I represent sometimes as a another individual loop around it, just to sort of make that bump pop out and give that detail it deserves. And bottom. And you kind of have to just rely on your own mental map and model to know whether or not you're dealing with a side face or a bottom face or a top face, especially when you get into stuff like a complex wrist. But what we can do is we can easily take these two faces here and pop them, bridge them over to our the back of our character's arm, because that's the rear section. This is the rear of the finger. It carries through pretty cleanly. But when we're working with stuff like where the thumb meets, that can get tricky because we do the thumb like all of the fingers, but then the part where we end up merging them together ends up getting to be a bit of a tangle. It's an opportunity for a lot of things to end up becoming messy. What I'm going to do is I already have a finished version of this character. We're kind of running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I ended up doing this, I think a couple of years ago at this point. But a lot of the principles I work with now are still ones that I used back then, but like in a much messier form. Because, you always get better. But so this little guy, this is mesh. I knew I'd have to demonstrate it, so I put some key loop highlights on him. But he's a real mess. He looks great on Sketchfab though when it was all finished up. But note how I used this loop structure that goes like all the way around all of his fingers down to the bottom of his thumb, and then back out to his the inside of his arm. That's possible. Like that's viable, I think, as a solution. But then also you can see that I used a lot of catches here, I think, to try to, or one key catch around the knuckles, kind of subtly, to bring the detail down onto the hand as it carried forward. Mm-hmm. I hope you can see how it goes. And then around stuff like the elbow, I make another sort of shape to help try to capture the muscle detail. And that comes out looking pretty nice. You can also see a demonstration of the spike principle, where we use a loop that goes around the top, especially with stuff with the spines that go symmetrically. You have a loop down the top, and then you have another couple loops that sort of make a grid shape from there to encapsulate that. So these faces here would make up our caught area for our spikes. If you want to approach this model and try to retopologize it yourself, I basically dare you to come up with a cleaner solution than I did for these spikes on his shoulder, because they were a real bother to try to get going right. And I think I used up a lot of the geometry that was a bit more messy than I might have meant to. But they worked, and that's what mattered at the time. And the ears too. Note how.
Yeah, I hate ears.
Yeah. Note how you can see a bunch of like different catching structures, and they all sort of narrow themselves down to like this two-stage system, from the inner ear to the outer ear, and then another spike sort of technique at the very tip of it. So you have the loop that goes around the top, and the pair around the bottom. Once you learn all of, like the core patterns of retopologizing stuff, you can start to do it, like I was saying, intuitively. The secret weapon for retopologizing things, especially hard objects like teeth. So, for instance, I at this point, I remember this is one of the last sets of teeth that I hand did myself, and I was just basically making a top, bottom, left side, right side, and then subdividing it to be a cleaner box shape. That structure works for everything, I found. It even works for spheres, because you can end up, if you take a, let's demonstrate this. If we take a cube, right, and then we subdivide it, that's solidified. We end up with a sphere, and like the more times we subdivide out the top, bottom, left, right method, the cleaner we can end up making our rounder shapes, and it all just comes together. Now, see, yeah, shading smooth is essential when you're finished with your retopology, because it's how baking systems know to recognize that it's supposed to carry across and blend the bake information. So let's actually go ahead and move this guy to shade smooth, and you'll see that he has this smooth enough amount of detail, but it's far less than the high poly version. But when you overlay it together, you see that the silhouette of his low poly version is basically very close, except, you know, in some spots, but it was close enough. All right, so I'm nearly done, I think.
So
So we
yeah,
got-
we can leave this last 15 minutes for like any questions or help.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, do we have any specific questions or cases that I need to look at, or that you'd like my help looking at?
Could be questions about mouse
Any
tag.
resources? Do you have any resources on
Resources?
this? Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah, especially for anyone who's like relatively new to this kind of thing, because I'm sort of new to a lot of 3D art, to be honest.
Here, I can link you whatchamacallit, a Flip Normals video about it.
Okay,
yeah, there's
cool.
other.
Yeah.
There's also
Where can I?
there's also like a really nice Danny Mac tutorial on retopology for human faces.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Where can I find the links?
I'll send you those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I posted one in VC if you want to take a look at it.
Yep, got it.
Definitely something you
Yep.
can refer back to.
Yep, thank you.
This is not directly related to retopology, but how do you sculpt hands? I can never make proper.
Usually, I start off with, basic shapes for the hands. So like I'll use cubes to like block it out. Then I'll probably use like cylinders and tubes to block out fingers. I'll sculpt one finger in detail and then basically combine it with the detailed version of the basic hand.
Yeah, I think that what Druva says is kind of it's like the very mechanical approach to it. Like he tells you use boxes and you stick them together like that. But what I find is that you have to know what those boxes you're sticking together are supposed to look like, and there are a lot of helpful like blockings of anatomy, especially for stuff like hands. So I'll also go and look up for you real quick. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But you can find people who've done anatomy blockings of hands, and let's have a look up.
Can you use multiple?
Oh yeah.
Because there's
Let's just
different
use a single
sections.
one. A single one extrude through that. I never really
Yeah,
know what the best option is because you can't.
I don't think it's the best option is to it's not the best option to start from a single piece. It's easier to reattach them all together.
Yeah, I think it's the part of reattaching that has me stumped.
Yeah.
Because I can never really make it look good and smooth, at least.
Would you like me to take like 10 minutes to try to give you an example of how I do it with like a T-Rex hand with like 2 fingers to make it easy for me?
Yes, please.
Okay, so
I have a quick question.
what is it?
Were you using what add-on were you using, or were you even using an add?
I wasn't really using
Because I
any
noticed-
add-ons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Because it looked.
Because you can
something
see
just-
in my stack, my image there, it has quad remesher. I use quad remesher for any hard surface, like weapon or like fangs that I don't want to retopologize, because it makes it like a one-click button. Anything that's not going to bend or need to be, well, I'll actually share my screen again now that I think about it. So anything that doesn't need to bend, I can use remesh or with quad remesher to make it work. But the thing is that costs money, the add-on.
How much is it?
It's like $100 for it, and it's a one-time purchase. It's worth it.
But yeah, quad
Yeah.
remesher is crazy.
Because another thing is like ZBrush has quad remesher. No, not quad remesher. It's got like Z remesher is what they call it.
Yeah.
But it is fabulous, and you think that by looking at it that it will be all you need for retopology, but that's a lie, because it doesn't work with characters very well. And there's some tricks and fine tuning that you can do as you improve it. Basically, the trouble with Z-remesher is that it doesn't understand what loops are supposed to be for like your eyes or your mouth or around arms. It'll always place loops wherever it thinks that they sort of mathematically belong, rather than like reasonably belong. And that's an issue because you end up having a bad deformation and strange overuse of shapes or overuse of geometry.
That is true, which is why
Yeah.
no one ever uses Z-remesher for retopo.
Yeah, well, they only use it for refining sculpts and for stuff that, like I'm saying, doesn't need to bend. And that's stuff like armor or pieces of vehicles, but they need to be smooth and have a refined kind of shape. So I'm going to subdivide this. So note that I'm using proportional editing to sort of get the shapes for my alien hand down and figure it out more. We're going to bring them in together in sort of block mode like this, and they're going to be all good. All right, cool. I'm almost done. Sick. So now we have this guy all put together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to subdivide another time, and then I'm going to Control A, apply it, and then I'm going to go on into my sculpt mode, and I'm going to do a remesh. Test it out at this sort of box resolution. Not enough. So I'm going to bap that down by a couple degrees. Remesh it again. Right, okay. So smooth it out pretty well. Maybe a little too much, actually. So let's catch that. Remesh it. There we go. Right. Sick. Increase the smoothing detail. Alright. So now we have a hand for like a T-Rex or something like that. I'm not sure if this is a clear example that might help you, but what we're trying to aim for is a way to merge different shapes together that'll have them be able to make up a larger whole. So let's put the knuckles on our T-Rex hand. Add on the tendons. I'm just using my mouse for this because I think my pen ran out of juice, which is a little disappointing to have happen in the middle of a session. Let's look like that. And then if we're working and we want to have more detail brought in, I don't use the remesh after I've merged them all together. What I do is I'll use the dynamic topology instead, because I find that it gives us more control over what we're sculpting, and it lets us maintain a reasonable amount of detail on spaces that are not all that detailed to begin with. So stuff like the back of an arm or a smooth stretch of skin over like the torso doesn't need nearly as much detail as something like the nose or the corner of an eye. So I'm going to go into dynamic topology. You're getting a bonus sculpting lesson. So Lucky you. But I use constant detail, and I drop the detail I like, but then I buff it to something like 120 or whatever if it's like close enough that I prefer. And I'm able to get a shape for a character. And then we're gonna bring out crease. Is this helpful, or do you have any more questions?
I think just half the things you just used I didn't know existed.
Yeah, right. So do you want me to talk more about how dynamic topology works, or do you want any other?
Unfortunately, I got class in 15 minutes, so I guess
I
if
love
it could be
that.
wrapped it out, yeah, I guess.
All right. So dynamic topology is a essential part of sculpting with Blender for getting detail added on to your character or anything you're sculpting. What it does is it is able to dynamically adjust and add more or less detail to something, depending on what settings you give it. And the settings that it provides you are basically relative detail, which is based on how close you are to the object. So if you want to add more detail to something, you have to zoom in closer to it. And then constant detail, which is whatever the dial resolution is set here to, is whatever dial resolution it's going to have. So I've given it 120, which means that it's going to automatically start applying 120 resolution of things. But we can see that stuff that's higher resolution smooths out much slower than stuff that's lower resolution. So I can switch down to here. And if I want to just simplify things down without using my retopology or without using anything else. Okay. If I want to change what resolution of the object I'm looking at without making any changes to the sculpture, there's a brush in Blender called Simplify. And what Simplify does is it just brushes over your mesh with the detail that you've given it in your dynamic topology setting. So I just brushed over this like low level detail. But if I go back up to 120 and do it again, you'll see like no difference because it's just going and change the resolution to be what it already was. And equally, like let's say I'm going to get really crazy and start like adding blobs just for the sake of it, just for the demo here. But when I go up and I make this become 300, then what will happen when I go to simplify it? It's going to be adding detail, and you can't see it. But when we switch on to Z and we see the mesh, yeah. So wherever I brush is gonna get filled with that kind of detail.
Wait, how's your computer not crashing right now?
He has a
It's a very strong
3090.
computer.
Wait, what?
Yes.
He has a really good GPU, that's why.
Oh my god. That
Yes.
amount of version
I
is
just
a-
installed. I was installing Cyberpunk all night, and it finishes like an hour before this tutorial. I didn't get to play it at all yet.
Quick question: why would you use dynamic retopology when you already have a high poly mesh to make it, you know?
Well, you don't have a high poly mesh to begin with. Like you're sculpting
Oh.
from like a
Okay.
block, and you want to add stuff like wrinkles and detail on your character's like face and belly. Let me go and demonstrate this. So we're going to go back on to being a solid mesh. So we say this high poly sculpt was made in ZBrush, and because ZBrush is a dedicated sculpting app, it has far less like system overhead. So I've done you the service of estimating the model when exporting it, but it is very detailed, is like what I'll tell you.
Yeah, I don't think I can be sculpting anytime soon until I upgrade my GPU.
You don't
I mean,
have to
here's the-
sculpt at this resolution.
Yeah, you don't have to sculpt in that resolution at all.
Oh god.
Yeah. And like if you're using ZBrush is expensive. Why do I keep recommending it? Because it works really well, that's why. But like let's say I want to make this imp here. What should I do to him? I want to give him like a battle scar, okay? So what I do is I turn on dynamic resolution. I'm going to sample whatever his fate topology is here. And it says it's 331, okay? So I'm going to come along and I'm going to just kind of say 360 because it's just a little more than what it already has and it lets us have a little more detail. So Imp here wants to, or I want Imp to have a battle scar. He doesn't want a battle scar because he wants to keep his pretty face the way it is, but I'm gonna give him a battle scar. So we gotta come here and we're gonna do crease, and I'm going to make the strength pretty deep.
Oh god.
It's gonna, yeah, it takes a while to undo.
This is actually me whenever I sculpt.
Right, because there's nothing in the buffer. So the first undo action you do is always more intensive, time intensive. So, but again, like we were saying, Blender has a lot of overhead, which makes it not as good for sculpting as ZBrush because all ZBrush is worried about is your sculpting.
Yeah.
So it can handle much more vertices than Blender because Blender is worried about how to render these, how to animate it, and other stuff to keep track of because it's far more obvious on a scene potentially in Blender. So its space is much more
When you have a
limited.
question in regards to something I maybe want to get into, and maybe I can think you can
Right.
tell by my name, but in what kind of situations would you use sculpting to model a weapon, to make a weapon? In what kind of situations?
So let's say that you want to have like a fancy like stock for a weapon, or you want to have like cool ornate filigree detail and things to go over top of the weapon. That can be really useful. There's also, I think Druva is about to show and recommend another like cool thing. But like, let's say you want to have like a cool like weird wizard gun with like a twisty branch handle.
Sorry, I switched.
But get into detail, Druva. Go on.
Oh yeah, so like let's say you have organic aspects in your weapon. So like let's say you have like a skull or some sort of detail. It can even be for stuff like runes and stuff like I talked about last week, right?
Yeah.
You can basically do all that stuff with sculpting. So here, let me open up just a quick example old sword.
Give me a moment. I just need to quickly join my
Right.
visual narratives class.
Right. When
yeah.
when you say
More
weapons, do you mean like firearms, or do you mean like classical
In general,
bludgeoners and swords?
any kind of weapon. When it comes to, be it fantasy, futuristic, just modern, in general, just any kind of weapon. It's just like something that you can use to hurt someone. Product.
I can show you a pretty world class artist that does that makes like hard surface modeling in ZBrush like look like a breeze. But I'm gonna have to find out where he is, where he's hidden.
Yeah, but Rain, you see
Oh,
this?
yeah, so,
like,
like,
let's
next
say
event that. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, so like example for like a pommel, right? Originally this was like a basic sphere that I just modeled out on top of this handle, and then I took it into ZBrush and just sculpted detail on it. That's like more organic.
So, yeah,
And then
so
you can
when you
do stuff on swords like this where you can like slap runes on there with sculpting, or like or Marcus said, edge damage, like hammer marks, like more detailed stuff.
how long did it take you to make that?
This took a day
Oh, a day.
because it was out of my head. This is not something that you should ever do because I suck at designing. So this was
Yeah,
like something I tried for fun.
Look
He's
like
got like the basics of like the sword looks really nice, but the guard looks too thin and the skull looks kind of weird.
I mean,
That's just, like-
I got this off of a like I saw the proportions off a concept on ArtStation, but the whole design was just my thing. Like, so I
It's
saw a
true.
sword with the guard this big and a handle this thin. It's not all random, but like for the most part, I would just stick to like following concepts that professionals do.
Oh, that
Yeah.
reminds me. Are we gonna be covering animation and rigging on Blender anytime soon, or?
I'm gonna we will do that, not this semester, but next semester, because I'm
Okay.
probably gonna get good old Mike Chan to do that one because he's the best.
He's the expert on
animator.
it.
I want to learn how to make something rotate. I want to make like a circle rotate around a certain object. That's about it.
Oh, there's if you want, I can show you that later because your class is about to start. But that
in the meantime.
animating simple stuff like that should be a breeze for you.
Yeah, I don't think I described it well, but it's more of how do I explain it? It would be better if I sent a GIF, but I don't know if I can find a GIF with this exact. I'll try to find something to reference what I'm trying to figure out, I guess. But in general, thanks for the session. Have a great day.
Yep. See you guys.
Okay,
Thanks for
thank
coming.
you.
I have a question.
Yeah. What's up, Isaiah?
Wait, I know this might sound dumb, but would you recommend, like, if say you're doing a clothed character, would you guys recommend, like, I just start with the bare body and then just copy certain faces from the retopologize bare body for the clothing or something?
Oh, you mean like start with the body and
Yeah.
then use retopology to make like a T-shirt or something over top?
Like, first retopologize the entire body and then if say you're making a t-shirt or a long sleeve t-shirt or something, you just cut the faces from the retopologized body and then just
So Isaiah, let's say you're doing something super simple like t-shirt or jeans. You can definitely do that because, you know, they're tight fit clothing, right? Or if it's
Mhm.
close enough to the body where you can just take the faces off of the like retopo anatomy and then just duplicate it, right? But
Mhm.
if it's something like fur on your clothes, like I remember with your concept, right? There was you had like more thin
Rips.
clothes and then like rips.
Yeah.
So with that sort of thing, if you really want, you could duplicate faces for like the thin clothing, and then
Mhm.
kind of like hard surface model that stuff, and then you can do sculpting for like the rip parts or like the fur.
And how would I handle, like, retopology with the rip part?
What I would do if I wanted to do like a rip in a jeans is I'd probably not make the rip be a part of the geometry unless there's supposed to be like dangly pieces coming out of it. If it was just supposed to be like a hole that had like no dangling string, what I'd do is I would just use an alpha texture and have that kind of expose like the knee by like brushing over it to look like it was a worn area, and then I would add on like sort of that soft sort of white thread where the dye's been faded at. That would kind of get the gist across, I think.
Like, I'm just gonna show you what model I'm working on. Like,
I'm just gonna ask for this specific case. Wait. Hold on. Gonna send it to the VC. This one. Like there's like a rip on the shoulder around like the shoulder area.
Are you streaming? I don't think you
Oh no,
are.
he posted it in
Oh,
VC.
I posted a picture. Or
Oh.
would you rather have me stream it?
I would prefer that.
Okay. All right. Let me try this.
You're sculpting from the drawing you did, right?
Yes.
You gotta get your 3D up to your 2D because your 2D looks really great.
Let me